Kirsten's consulting focuses on refiguring school culture to better support all learners and helping school leaders find just, creative, and liberating approaches to school transformation. Kirsten's Wounded by School, Recapturing the Joy in Learning and Standing Up to Old School Culture was one of the 10 best-selling books at Teachers College Press and was nominated for Book of the Year by Forward. Reviewers have called the book, quote, brilliant, insightful, unsparing, hopeful, end of quote. She is also a founding member of IDEA, the Institute for Democratic Education in America, where a national educational activist group working to support transformation of the education sector. Kirsten received her doctorate from Harvard Graduate School of Education, where she studied large school districts that have made significant changes in school culture through the improvement of instruction. She was an English major at Vassar College, she says, a really long time ago. Kirsten is the mother of 4 children and helped to found a cooperative, parent-run school attended by her 4 children. She is married to Richard Elmore at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, who amazingly fell in love with her, it says so here, when she had 4 about-to-be teenage children and has helped to raise them to early adulthood after bringing up 2 kids of his own. Kirsten thinks and works in Brookline, Massachusetts, where her cynicism about Massachusetts' recently federal waivers on NCLB may match yours here in Minnesota. Please welcome me and joining Kirsten Olson.
Hello, beautiful people. I'm so glad to be here.
So I just want to first say thank you to Bill and to Jamie. Where is Jamie? It is such an honor to be here. I have admired all of you as educators and as people on the forefront of educational transformation, really since I first came here and met Dee and Doug Thomas at the Minnesota New Country School when I was in graduate school. And there's this kind of self-absorption about stuff that's happening on the East Coast and stuff that's happening on the West Coast in education. And you guys have, I think, really been doing a lot of the stuff that we are just beginning to talk about now for decades. And that is too unrecognized. And my colleague at IDEA, Dana Bennis, has moved out here to partake in this environment and to be a part of what's going on here. So it's really exciting for me to be here. So I just wanted to say that when I arrived last night, I was all happy, settling in, tweeting that I was here. And at about midnight, I was struck by, I think, what must have been food poisoning. And I was so struck, lightning fast, that I ran into the door jamb in the dark of the bathroom. I think folks can relate to this. And was not sure that I was actually going to be able to make it here this morning. And so thank you for being allowing about that. And also just to say that my synaptic function may be a little less than, and if it seems like that to you, you're right. You're not imagining that, but my pleasure at being able to speak with you and I hope learn with you is really the thing that has carried me here. So I want to just begin by saying a little bit about my work. And someone that I met in my work. Todd was the oldest child of Mormon parents who had him when they were very young. As his mom said, we were barely more than teenagers ourselves, and his dad said, we didn't know what hit us when we had Todd. From the earliest grades, he had a lot of trouble in school. He couldn't complete assignments. He couldn't sit still. He had trouble following directions. He never finished his homework. He was told constantly that he was lazy and should focus more to be successful. In 7th grade, his English teacher offered a king-size Snickers bar for the person who wrote the best poem. And Todd had never had a king-size Snickers bar before, and he really wanted it. So he sat at his kitchen table for several days working on the poem, and he thought it turned out pretty well. He handed it in and got it back a couple of days later, and he had received a 0. And he went up to his teacher afterwards and he said, "Hey, what happened? I thought I did pretty well on that." And his teacher said, "That was too good. You couldn't possibly have done that." Todd tried to fit in, find a place in his high school. So he went out for sports. He tried to act like a jock, but he kept getting kicked off of his sports teams for his low GPA. Ironically, in school, he would have these little pockets of success, like in European history, and that would make people more angry at him. They would say, "Look, Todd, you really can do this if you just focus and pay attention." But finally, in the 11th grade, he dropped out with a 0.9 average, and as he said, you have to work really hard to have a 0.9 average. About the same time, his girlfriend, who is now his wife, got pregnant. And she said to him, "Todd, I know how gifted you are. I know how much you have to give to the world. I really want you to go back to school and try and finish high school." And he said it wasn't until he was holding his brand new baby boy in his arms, sitting beside his wife, that he said to himself, "This isn't just about me anymore. I've really got to address what's happening to me in my life." And so between working a couple of jobs and taking care of the baby, Todd enrolled in a GED program, which he completed. And then without telling him, his wife enrolled him in a couple of courses at the local university, which he started to take. And to his great surprise, he started doing well in his college courses. And he kept taking harder and harder courses like econ and statistics, things that he didn't think he could possibly be successful in. And as he said, my family kept expecting me to hit a wall. I kept expecting to hit a wall. But he didn't. And he said a real sign of this for himself was that one day he and his wife had to do something with the baby in the missed class. And his professor came up to him the next day and said, "Todd, where were you? I missed you in class. It's not like you to miss class." And he said, "No, that's exactly like me to miss class. I'm exactly the kind of guy who misses class." And he realized that people's image of him was changing and his image of himself needed to change also. So I met Todd, and Todd is a real person, as a postdoctoral fellow in astrophysics at Harvard. And he is now a part-time faculty member at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So for the last 10 years, I have been listening to people's learning stories. I sometimes think that almost everyone has a story to tell me. Sometimes the cab driver on the way to the airport has his story that he wants to tell me. Dads on the sidelines of a soccer field want to talk to me about their own learning experiences and how they think that's affecting how they're seeing their kids. Superintendents at Achievement Gap Initiative meetings want to talk to me about their own learning experiences and sometimes their learning wounds. I've talked to people about their earliest and very pleasurable experiences, about the times they felt like they're most having fun and playing, about their memories of high school, and key learning hurdles. It seems like AP Bio comes up a lot in key learning hurdles. Anyone here can relate to that? What I came to feel was that we really didn't have a way of talking about the impact of this institution on our sense of selves and our formation of our concept of ourselves that we seem to hold all throughout our lives, no matter how consciously we've investigated it. Because while I met many folks who had stories to tell about a wonderful teacher who had passion for the Krebs cycle, but also really engaged them around relationships in the classroom, or one of my interviewees who said she had a particular teacher who really saw her and knew her. And she said she was like an imaginary bridge to my future. or a coach who truly believed and set the bar higher than a player ever thought they could possibly achieve. In spite of these wonderful stories, I heard way too many stories of dysfunction and wounding and deep shame around experiences in school. Things like,
my math teacher told me you'll be flipping burgers for the rest of your life. Don't even try to learn math.
I went to kindergarten as a happy child. Throughout my years in the educational system, I lost a lot of my happiness, imagination, and enthusiasm. It all faded away, confined to the labels of the outside world, based on the concepts of intelligence. School was focused on organizing and labeling students based on so-called innate abilities. If you get good grades, test well, you're intelligent. This pierced my self-esteem armor over and over to the point of self-hatred.
I told my teacher I wanted to go to college. He said I'd be pregnant and drop out in 2 years.
I'm one taco short of a combination platter.
needless to say, this was a middle school boy. So I found that even in my investigation of highly successful learners, folks who seem to be doing really well, the ones the institution points to as the people who are really making it, there was this sense of cynicism, of distance from pleasure in learning, and a perception that school was a very high stakes game that had to be played perfectly, or they were going to risk some kind of irreparable fall in status around their school careers.
I'm really good at school, but I'm very secretive about making mistakes. I always want to be right and have the right answer. Otherwise, people think you're dumb.
So this learning not to take risks was a huge part of the stories of people who appeared to be very successful in school. The project for me really began with a study that I did in graduate school around highly engaged learners. I called them virtuoso and artisan learners, who were in many cases people for whom learning was at the center of their lives. There was a research professor, a marketing executive, a creative writer, a set designer, and what they kept saying was, although they were passionate about their learning, their real learning was never in school. So when I got out of graduate school and began actually teaching, my eye was really drawn to the kids who were checked out, who were silent, and who were not learning, doing what Herb Cole calls not learning because the person perceives the institution to be in some way violating them, and the only way they can express resistance is to not learn. Or the hundreds and hundreds of kids who were just passive and checked out. Just tell me how to get the answer. So I sat down and began listening to kids without judging them, and what they said is, as we all know, the work is so boring. No one cares if I'm here or not. And in the research that actually became the book, I interviewed over 100 people between the ages of 11 and 67, from urban, rural, suburban settings, all different socioeconomic statuses, to try to begin to sort out some of the patterns around that, and that became this book. And what I found was that the interview data constellated around these 7 kinds of themes. And maybe some of them are familiar to you personally. These wounds of creativity, wounds of compliance, wounds of the average, of being in the bell curve, right in the middle, wounds of underestimation, and wounds of perfectionism.
There was something mechanical about school, a mold I never seemed to fit, never quite understood. Although I knew inside that my writing was powerful and artistic, I was unwilling to make myself vulnerable to someone else's critique. The years of frustration and failures had taken a toll on my confidence, and I found myself unable to trust in my own ability in the classroom.
Wounds of creativity.
I must have held the world's record for detentions and suspensions in elementary school. I was told I was mentally defective, emotionally damaged.
This is Bernard Gassaway, who is one of my colleagues in the work that I do, and he is an award-winning superintendent in Brooklyn.
The rich kids always knew how to be good kids, so I guess it's natural that the schools wanted to work with them more than the rest of us.
Many years later, I can still remember my spelling scores from the 3rd grade. They were lousy. That's why I decided to become an accountant.
So the impact of these experiences, the fact that people could remember their spelling scores from the 2nd grade at age 67 was astonishing to me. And the emotional content of many of the interviews was also really, really powerful. I did these long, semi-structured autobiographical interviews, and often we'd have to stop the tape. People would become tearful and they'd say, I just have to get myself together. This was an architect who was talking about learning to read, and he said, this is like a kernel of shame, the center of my being. And he really had never talked about this with anyone. To understand the impact of what I was seeing, there really wasn't a theoretical literature, and I put this in here because I thought this would be interesting to you guys. I had to go to a psychological literature on narcissistic wounding, which is a Jungian idea that if we don't get sufficient mirroring, and in this case from parents, we are wounded and require empathic healing, and we will continue to reenact the wounding until we are healed, that we are impelled to do this. Also, the pervasive, and this for my interviewees was a very powerful theme, the pervasive positive framing of education in this culture, which is such a powerful discourse, and often one that we don't have ways of talking back to very powerfully. Our educational system is great. If you don't make it, you personally didn't try hard enough. It's your fault. Or just be grateful you're able to go to school. Or I don't know what kids complain about, school was much tougher in my day. Or kids should just get their butts in gear. All these things which may have pieces of truth for those folks, but contributed to some of the cultural myths that I think really hobble us in terms of moving the sector forward. And that is that education is a level playing field, and those who do not succeed are individually at fault. When there is this abundant socioeconomic cultural literature that education is about conferring privilege on the already privileged. And you need only go to a Harvard graduation, which is something that I occasionally have to do, and look around at the audience to see how much this is an institution about conferring privilege on the already privileged. Incredibly powerful in settings like that. And as the brilliant John Holt, I think one of the most brilliant writers about education that we have, said, school is like a meatpacking business designed to teach children what grade of meat they are and to send them off to the right market. But make sure they believe it. It only works if they believe it. So the ways in which education can be liberatory and democratizing and also reproduce social and economic inequality, I think is really some of the powerful complexity that we have to hold as educators to speak to the multi-layered nature of the transformation that we are trying to urge along and in some cases ignite. This is a real challenge for me, and I have been in this kind of paradox I think for 25 or 30 years. And I see it all the time in school every day. But what does that paradox lead to? Some of this anger that many of our students have towards school, and this is a young man who was describing his many failures in school, and one of the ways that he solved it was, I proceeded to cheat all the way through high school. I started buying my science projects a year in advance after the previous grade science fair. Some think that's pretty entrepreneurial and a really good idea. He actually is a graduate student in education, so let us all beware. But it is clear to all of us, and I think I'm repeating something that we all say to each other all the time, that you all have been saying to each other for decades. The old industrial model that was designed to sort and track kids based on race, class, and gender is working all too well. In my hometown of Boston, less than half of all minority kids will graduate from high school in 4 years. Nationally, 15% of low-income students will complete high school within 9 years. And we have all these new economic studies which describe wealth as the most important predictor of educational attainment. So what do we know? That wealth begets wealth, and unfortunately our system does not address this very powerfully. Our old-fashioned ideas about ability, even though we've been in this neurocognitive revolution for the last 15, 20 years, we still see a lot of ability tracking in school, largely based still on race and social class, and difference deeply stigmatized. The idea that we sort of got what you're born with and that it can't be changed, we know to be inaccurate because human cognition it's increasingly clear, grows over the lifespan, grows in response to environment, and is incredibly plastic. And this period that we've just been in, this tragic accountability period in which we have been forced as professionals to define learning as product, has had the effect on students of, and this is a kid who graduated with one of my children from Brookline High School in Massachusetts. He was talking about AP European history. Thank God I will never have to study the Protestant Reformation or Martin Luther again. So what does this mean? Less courage in learning, disconnection from pleasure in learning, and kids cynical about change. That's just the way school is. School is supposed to kick you around. School sucks for everyone, deal with it. Just take care of yourself and don't worry about anyone else. So for me, I came to see school as this crucible in which self-concept is formed. And for some folks, I would say a small number, it's a positive one. But for an awful lot of kids, it has really become a profoundly dysfunctional system.
Crazy, stupid, lazy. I believed I was broken.
This is Jonathan Mooney, who is the founder of an international advocacy group for folks with learning differences and is the author of this book, Learning Outside the Lines. And this is what he said to me about himself and what he concluded about himself before he eventually discovered a different path and graduated from Brown University. So I wrote this book not to further critique an already embattled institution, but to name this reality. As one of my interviewees said, naming our reality is the only way to be free. And also to help people find their inner warrior, and perhaps to help heal this institution. Although my commitment to this institution, and I hope we get to talk about this tomorrow, is increasingly one that I question. Is this really the institution that we want to heal? So how do you think people healed? I want you to turn to somebody beside you and just talk about that. How did the people that I look at in my book heal? Okay, all you healers. Can we hear from some of you? Is anybody brave enough to stand up? Yes. Stand up so we can all hear you.
We felt that the healing process probably began when they found the things that invalidated their educational history, when they found the things that they were good at, when they found the ways that they excelled. That would be the only thing that could contradict years of being told that they're not.
They started to have some successes. They found what they were passionate about. Is that yes? Yeah. Great. Thank you. Yeah.
When they start to use different words for themselves, words like criminal, stupid, cops hate me, whatever it is, and start to use words like student, smart, college bound.
Did everyone hear that? No. Can you stand up? Just say that again. I'm sorry.
Sometimes it starts when they just use different words to define themselves, when they let go of things like stupid, criminal, special ed, level 4, labels that have been put on them that may or might not have anything to do with who they are, and actually start to think of things like student, smart, college bound, teacher likes me, other students like me, that kind of thing. They start to have positive self-talk.
Thank you.
They found someone who believed in them.
Nice. Did everyone hear that? Yeah. 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 Nice. Nice. How about one more? Yeah. Hard work. Hard work. Hard work. Who said that? A man in the back. Hard work. Okay. Thank you. And you had your hand up. Yeah. Let's. Yes. Yes. Beautiful. Okay. Thank you. For my people, the first thing that they said in terms of their stages of healing was this sense of one person who cared about them and saw them uniquely really began this process of healing for them. Mr. Miller always told me I could do it, demanded that. He saw something in me when no one else did. He believed in me before I did. They needed to have a precursor to a belief in themselves in another person. But as they all said, this was no Hollywood story of dramatic reclamation and reinvention. That the road was very bumpy and had many, many setbacks. It seemed like things would go forward and then they would suddenly be back to where they had begun. And specifically, the path of healing was, as I discovered, like the path of healing from any major trauma, involving all those classic stages of grieving, anger, and mourning. And specifically, they constellated around these 5 stages of healing, many of which we've already, you have already named, which is this first stage of self-blame and private shame. It's me. I'm the only one, and this is all my fault, to moments of insight or little incremental changes in self-concept. Then this grieving and anger, and tremendous anger often towards the institution. Sadness about what could have been. And then the development in all of the people that I studied of critical consciousness around the institution itself. That the institution acts in ways that are not just about my individual fate, but are connected to larger social and cultural processes. And I can understand those. And then finally, reconciliation and re-engagement. Almost all the people that I studied are specifically activists in education in some way or another. As teachers, as school founders, as folks who are forming national organizations to try and transform the sector. So what I began to realize was that as people were telling me their story, they were actually beginning to heal. This process of talking about what had happened to them was the beginning of a moment of transit for them in terms of altering their concept of themselves. And through this process of talking to me, they were beginning to become advocates for themselves as learners in ways that they had not imagined was possible for them and that they did not dare to do previously. This is one of our early idea organizers who said, the reason that this is so critical is that once you have the knowledge, you can either live in ignorance or fight for freedom. And he was talking specifically about the school system. Again, this road that was bumpy and unpaved, and this is Todd talking about his own experience. It couldn't just be a single success. He needed lots of them to begin to confirm that he really was a different kind of person. He needed an external change, and as he said, if he went back to his old high school, no matter where he was now, he would begin to act like that old screw-up. He just had to be around those people who saw him in that way, and he began to transit back to his old self. And that context matters, and this is Todd talking about himself in graduate school. Back in Utah, people got mad at me all the time for blurting things out, being rude. Now in graduate school, I'm pretty much the same guy doing the same things, but here I'm considered brilliant, witty, and insightful. So there you go. There's graduate school for you. That's certainly my experience. And this is compacting a lot of data onto a lot of ideas onto a single slide, but one of the things that I have been studying subsequent to this book is the ways in which resilience really can be taught. And now I often go into schools and do this work with students and groups of teachers who are doing it with students. That we can learn to identify our cognitive distortions, that we can actually reprogram some of our negative memories by positioning a more positive one over top of it. We can rewire our brains. That we can develop mindfulness techniques around our triggering incidents so that we feel like we are the ones in control. And this is, for me, in my work, combined with adults who are joined together in this project of de-escalating alienation within the system, which is, I think, what the work that all of you have been engaged in your own settings, is really moving out of, as I think someone said over here, this sense that we as adults see each other in terms of our roles and responsibilities, to all these kids are my kids. And one of the educators that I work with says that specifically. He drives around his neighborhood and he says, all these kids are my kids. Every single one. They all belong to me, and everyone at our school is responsible for that. And specifically working with students around their own learning biographies, the sense that they do have a learning story, and that by telling it out loud and becoming aware of it, they will be more in control of it and able to understand it in ways that help them be successful in school and to help them advocate for themselves. Sometimes when I do this work with students, they say to me, I didn't know that I had a learning story. And for teachers to engage in the work too, they have to know what their own learning story is, which is part of the workshop I wanted to just introduce here, and I think I'm going to maybe do a little piece of it tomorrow morning, is what is your learning story and how is that affecting how you regard students? So that students genuinely do begin to experience joy in learning again. I heard a beautiful session, Bill and Sarah talking about the community center school where they teach, and the ways in which kids really do experience tremendous joy in learning, and which they never had previously. So I want to just pause here and ask us to think a little bit about where joy in learning comes from. And I'm just going to tell a little story about myself. When I was 7 years old, I read my first Laura Ingalls Wilder book. I don't know if any of the women in this room can relate to that. I was just learning how to read, and there were a lot of words in the text that I didn't understand, like soddy, Mr. Hansen, half pint. Really didn't get what those were about. But the story itself was absolutely captivating to me. This sense of a family needing to leave its place, its former place in the world, and go out into a new world and start all over completely on their own, without help. And the only thing that held them together were their familiar bonds and their capacity to figure out what they needed to do for themselves. And for me, in terms of my own family, which was not very safe, in which children were not always well taken care of, in which the mother and father were not always benevolent and loving people, I was tremendously called by this story in ways that I really didn't understand. And this impelled me to read more and more. I was incredibly drawn to the bulldog Jack. And he really initiated me into what I think of as a lifelong love of animals and the ways in which they can be a bridge between our world and some kind of magical world. They tell us things that we don't know in any other way. And the father who took seriously the thoughts and competence of a 7-year-old girl, the mother who was wise and loving and appreciative, and the family all snug in their beds at night. And the Garth Brooks illustrations. And Garth Brooks writes specifically about the ways in which he sees his illustrations as inviting a sense of possibility and beyond in young readers. And the prairie. I had never seen a prairie when I was 7 years old, and the ways in which I imagined it, and she wrote about it as the morning glories singing their song on the banks of the sod roof. These became for me many of the archetypal themes of my life, and continue to be in ways that I'm still only now appreciating. And although now as a feminist critic, I understand that the gender roles in this book are worth investigating, and there's also a little bit of nationalism there in terms of the politics. For me, it was simply captivating. And so what happened was that my friend Audrey, who lived next door, and I created a house on the banks of what we called Plum Creek, for the next several years. We made in a mulberry bush our own soddy. We spent hundreds of hours creating a dam in the creek. And this is a picture of us, this is me on the left, and that's Audrey on the right, being Ma and Pa. We're doing a little gender bending there. But being Ma and Pa. And what I remember about this is that there was never a single adult who oversaw us. There were no goals attached to any of our learning, and there never had to be an outcome. And this was, for me, one of the most passionate learning experiences of my life. So I want you to just turn again to someone in the sitting beside you, maybe somebody you haven't talked to yet. Do you have an experience like that? Is there one that comes to mind for you? And just talk about that a little bit. So, how about one more minute? This is really juicy. I hate to stop. This is the best part of what I do. So will someone share a little bit? Everyone here is a friend. Yeah. And will you stand up so we can all hear you?
I've been teaching myself piano for the past 2 years, and I love music. I love music. I've always loved music. Just been playing piano. Sat down, taught myself. Hold on to it.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's great. Yeah, please. Stand up, shout it out. Great. Yeah, that's great. Beautiful. How about another one? Yeah. Stand up.
Education when I was in high school was more like Pink Floyd. It's like breaking the wall.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
My brother and I, when we were younger, we were into American Gladiators. We created the best American Gladiators ops, of course, that we thought, and maintained.
That's great. How old were you?
About 8.
Yeah. Okay. Couple more. Somebody over here? Yeah. Fun, back in the day, film strips. Okay, how about one more?
I got one.
Yeah.
We learned about centrifugal force when I was about 7. Like tying Barbie doll to a roller skate, tying the roller skate to the back of the bike, see if we could make her fly.
That's right. Talking about that body dysmorphia thing with Barbie, right? Yeah, that's great. So what are some commonalities of what people have just said? Creative play. Okay, what else? Experiential, the word standardized is nowhere near it.
Discovery and problem solving.
Yeah, right. Not at school. There were some here that were at school. Couple, right? Personal connection, right. How many folks have specifically drawn on some of these experiences as you think about the kinds of learning environments you're trying to create for your students? Yes. How many people feel they can do that in their current environments? Wait, let's really see this. Yeah. And is that why you're here? Yes. Yes. How about in conventional public school settings? Not so much. Yeah. I want to say personally that I am increasingly convinced that learning is walking away from this thing we call school. That is the era that we are in. That it's not really clear why we need to do learning in school anymore. And so that raises the moral question of what is school for? Why do we do school? Why do we ask kids to come there? If increasingly you can learn virtually anything you want, anywhere, with the appropriate supports or motivation. I think that's a really powerful question, and the ways in which learning is constructed in most conventional environments is absolutely in conflict with what we know about learning from our own biographies And now from this huge neurocognitive literature, starting with some of the flow studies, Csikszentmihalyi, that choice, invitation, downtime, we love to kind of be flirted with in terms of our subject. We don't like what we're studying. We like to have the sense that we're pursuing it, we're being seduced in our interest. That the right amount of novelty and challenge is essential. All of those things that are not available, as we know, to most students in conventional learning environments. And that in terms of the neurobiology of learning, and again, I'm not saying anything that all of you don't live every day, that high levels of stress, emphasis on low-level cognitive tasks reduces our capacity for creative thought and deep engagement at a neurobiological level. We can't get into flow if we're being asked to do a standardized test activity for most people. And we can actually see that now on fMRIs. Flow is that state of being in learning simply for the pleasure of it, becoming disconnected from a sense of time, from a sense of the effort involved. You're doing it just because you love it. And so what I found, and just to come to the end here, what I found with the learners that I studied for this book, and now in a whole new set of learning pictures that I'm creating for the next thing that I'm writing about, is this capacity to get ourselves into flow is something that we can practice. And it builds tremendous resilience in learners to know what those practices are. And again, we used to think that resilience was only for the lucky few. It was inborn, and either you had it or you didn't as a learner. And we all have demonstrations of the ways in which that's inaccurate in our own lives as professionals. So resilience is this kind of ordinary magic, but it has to be attached to these deeply pleasurable qualities of learning. And that it's like a fire that we can bank up inside ourselves, like for me, that Laura Ingalls Wilder experience early on in my life. Allowed me to begin to notice when learning was pleasurable for me, which was one of the key pieces for me, I think, of becoming a really engaged learner, is I started to think that learning was fun, and for me it had almost nothing to do with school. And this last piece about cherishing our passions, knowing that our passions are important. This is a picture of my son, Sam, who, this is his first headshot for his acting career. I will be gratefully accepting all charitable donations for the support of Sam into perpetuity. Sam was cast as Romeo in a production of Romeo and Juliet in the 9th grade, where he had to kiss Juliet on stage. Juliet happened to be male and was gay, and he made that all work, and he has decided he's going to be an actor now forever. And so my willingness to walk down this line as a parent and say his passions are actually what are going to guide him is the critical part in helping him find his way in the world, has really been a piece that we've had to wrestle with as he's decided to go to acting school and not college. And the ways in which powerful schools really put this passion at the center of their learning programs, and this is the Met Big Picture School, where the Black Box Theater is the center of the campus. And students are encouraged to know themselves as learners exclusively, almost, in terms, and begin to experience themselves as learners around their pleasure in learning. So what I just want to suggest is that resilience and pleasure are tremendously connected in ways that we are only beginning to demonstrate. But as learning walks away from school, which I think it is, we will have to come to know that more powerfully to support learners wherever we find them as teachers. And that's what's going to give them and us bounce, understanding what that is, and to help our students and ourselves overcome our negativizing brains and deeply set stories about the ways in which we haven't been successful, the ways we've been wounded. And to put ourselves in a playful state of mind. And I'm in a little group now that is looking at play and the literature on play as perhaps an issue that we can forward as a sort of swift boat strategy in terms of overturning some of the paradigms around learning in school, because we have so much new evidence of how important it is for metacognitive, higher level metacognitive work. So all this helps our students start to understand that they're fabulous, and this is what I always say to them, and that when I go into school now, having done all these interviews and being in the presence of all of these learning stories, I begin each encounter with the idea that there are no ordinary people and that I have never talked to a mere mortal. And this is a beautiful quote. This was sent to me by someone who had read the book and thought I would like it. It's a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses, to remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you talk to may one day be a creature who, if you saw them now, you would be strongly tempted to worship. All day long, we are, in some degree, helping each other to one or other of these destinations. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities that we should conduct all our dealings with one another, all friendships, all love, all play, all politics. And to bring it down to the school level, again, something that you all live every day, students tell us that the way teachers treat them matters more than any other factor in the school setting in terms of their attachment to school, their commitment to school goals, and the academic future they imagine for themselves. So what is the moral purpose of school? That really has become the consuming question for me as I begin to think about people's learning stories in relation to this institution and the powerful necessity for transformation and paradigm shift. And what is the effect that we as adults are having on kids in school? Are we aware of them at every moment? This was taken by one of my undergraduate students. She was doing her student teaching, and she just took out her iPhone and took that one. I hope that I'm never speaking to that teacher at that moment. Because it is the idea that my work is really based in is what one of my mentors, Cornel West, said. Education is soul crafting. That is the business that we are in. And if we are not kicking ass on the American educational system pretty much every minute, we are not doing the right work. If we are not working to transform this system, we have not placed ourselves in the right path of the work. And another one of my mentors, Herb Cole, basically said that to me. Girl, if you are not making trouble, you're not working on the right problem. And you better be making trouble every single day. So, just in closing, I join with you in your effort to make trouble and to say we gotta pump up the volume even more. We gotta shift way out of what we're doing into something dramatically different. So thank you. I can stay here.
We have some gifts for Kirsten, and Steve had put together a Minnesota package. Since in Boston, I won't take them all out, but I'll tell you what's in here. There's a can of Spam from Austin, Minnesota.
I know I need that.
Okay, bag of wild rice. I don't think you can get that in Boston.
Good, thank you.
A Pearson salted nut roll, which is made in St. Paul. I think you can get this in Boston. A roll of Scotch tape from the 3M company. It's got everything but a box of Cheerios and a frozen walleye.